speaker is Holger Dielenberg, and Holger is the founder of Space Tank Studio. I'm sure that some of you are familiar with Space Tank Studio, one of Melbourne's first makerspaces, advancing product development startups from prototype to commercialisation and export. Holger focuses on Melbourne's innovation blind spots by bridging the manufacturing gaps in Melbourne's startup scene and providing a pathway for engineers, innovative designers and product developers to bring their concepts to international markets. So I'd like to invite you up. Thanks, Holger.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. You did everything.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to concentrate my talk a little bit more on the commercial level of making. What happens when a creative practitioner or designer wants to start to commercialize their intellectual property or that special something that they're really good at. And generally what happens is a creative person is usually shithouse at commercializing something, and a commercial person is usually really shithouse at creating something. And so the challenge is to bring those two mindsets together. And I think a key role that makerspaces internationally as well as here locally play is to form that bridge between those two mindsets. Makerspace operators, I think, have a grave responsibility in a way, particularly as manufacturing around the world is transitioning away from low economy manufacturing, which is drifting into places like Argentina and Africa, away from China, and also advanced manufacturing, computer-controlled manufacturing is starting to take over and revolutionize a lot of factory floors. And what technology is doing is it's actually turning manufacturing into a white-collar industry, which also opens up pathways for a greater gender balance in those factory floors and in those practices. So what we're essentially seeing is the very beginning of not only disruptive products that are coming to market and changing the world and disrupting massive global industries, we're seeing actual social change as well, and governments are starting to realise this. So Australia is usually about 10 years behind the eight ball, we know that. China, America and Europe have been on this pulse about 10 to 15 years ago. We started to see the development of tech shop in America. I'm just going to find this arrow. Here we go. So here are some examples of what I've identified to be the key makerspace examples around the world. And all of the ones except for Space Tank started around 2005 to 2007. So they were really quite, they were renegades. But they didn't just come out of a place of passion. They came out of a pain point, and the pain point was an economic one, and it was also a pain point that Tyrell has sort of touched on in that gentrification and downturning of industries and economies in places like Detroit and Middle Europe and China, as China was starting to lose its grip on mass manufacturing. A lot of makers were being pushed to the fringes of cities or just being pushed out altogether. And that actually also naturally had a massive economic impact for governments. So what started to happen is some people started to see an opportunity there. So when you look at, for instance, FAB9, which is where the whole makerspace phenomenon started in MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they basically said, well, we need more tinkerers and more innovative play in our university. So they started this little FAB9 idea, and 15 or 18, almost 20 years later, what we see is 700 FAB9s around the world, all stemming from that one inspiration. And that essentially started the revolution. Tech Shop jumped on board, and they did the McDonald's version of the makerspace. They started to franchise the model. And that's exactly why they also failed eventually. So they went into liquidation at the end of last year. And the reason why, the closing statement from the CEO of Tech Shop essentially said, he was very candid, and I found that very educational from an operational point of view. He said our failure was we didn't tap into the local capabilities of our areas. So on their focus to take over the world and franchise, they forgot about collaborating with the very institutions that were around them and that they should be supporting and could support them. So this is a really essential thing that makerspaces, I think, must do. We must collaborate. And also, as Targil touched on, when you get pushed out of your home, you lose your connections, right? So that essentially says that collaboration is vital. And even for a massive industry, collaboration is vital. They do it across borders, they do it, they partner with other companies who fill their own skills gaps, etc. We do that as individuals as well. And makerspaces bring that together, and Tech Shop essentially forgot that. So Soil in Shanghai, Shenzhen, there's a very, very sort of classic example of what was happening in China. I just posted something on Facebook this morning on the Space Tank Facebook page about the rise and fall of the makerspace phenomenon and the maker movement phenomenon in China. The government really got behind that because a couple of government people went into a makerspace one day and saw all this apparent innovative activity. What they actually were looking at was a geek putting a 12 volt solar panel on a shoebox. And this guy was just doing that because he thought it was fun. He was doing it out of play and out of experimentation. It was not a commercial idea, but this government person was, blew his mind, said, wow, look at that innovative, that's so amazing, that could be commercialized, we could import this, export this, blah, 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 blah. And it caused a ripple. And obviously they visited quite a few makerspaces. And what they essentially saw was the heart and soul of innovative activity. And as they were also seeing the decline of their low economy manufacturing in China and a rise of the middle class, what they were also seeing was we've got a lot of smart people who can provide front of shop design services in China, and these types of makerspaces can help push a brand new economy that we can call mass innovation. And they saw that makerspaces could be a tool for that. So they started to throw a lot of money at makerspaces. And of course then what happened is without a duty of care about who you're giving the money to, you end up with a makerspace cafe and a makerspace chat group. And they're all starting to use this term makerspace. People put a 3D printer in a library and call it a makerspace. It's not really a makerspace. Now what's happening is there's backlash because all of these makerspace cafes and all of these organisations who weren't actually makerspaces were failing, but still gobbling up the government's money. So it was irresponsible funding, and that's now starting to bite them in the arse. Makerspace Munich and New Lab New York are for me the premier global examples of what a makerspace should be. They both represent a combination of state funding and corporate funding. And it's a great example of where you see the private sector and the public sector coming together to embrace a new wave of change and doing it responsibly, doing it ethically. So they're looking at the other category, but they're bringing investors in, they're providing visibility to this whole group of people who are making innovative things and not just a little solar power on a lunchbox. So my business mentor went to New Lab New York about 8 months ago, and he sat in the front foyer as he was waiting for his tour, and there was a guy sitting next to him as he introduced himself and said, hi, what are you doing here? And the guy said, I make rovers. And Scott said, rovers, okay, what kind of rovers? And the guy said, for Mars. So that gives you an indication of the types of product development activity that happens at New Lab New York. They've got people developing exoskeleton systems for industries. They've got farm wall developments. They've got a lot of businesses there, and they vet the businesses. They don't just let anyone in. There's investment at one end, basically forming a magnet that attracts very, very high caliber makers in the front door. And they really, really support them with training and education and business and development links. Makerspace Munich does a very similar thing, except it's probably got a more heavy reliability on corporate funding. So I think it's a 60-40 split, 60% BMW funding and 40% finance department of Munich, Bavaria. The reason why BMW does this is because they've got 20,000 engineers in a suburb in Munich. And what happens when you have that many smart people all doing the same job week after week after week is they get bored and they stop becoming, they stop being productive and they actually lose their innovative creativity. And so BMW said, all right, we'll give you a couple of $1 million a year. That's a lot of funding for a makerspace. And their kickback for them is, when they have one of their engineers able to come to a makerspace, it's starting to revitalise that innovative, spirit. So these are some really good examples and sort of take-home stories that we can apply when we try and do the same thing here. And these are the types of products that we really need to be looking at. And these are the types of products that are getting made overseas and not in Australia. We can make these products. There's absolutely no reason why we can't. This whole tyranny of distance thing is an obsolete argument. We shouldn't be using it anymore. We have last-minute, logistic capabilities. There actually are no excuses anymore. Technology has replaced those excuses with real-time capabilities. So any of these products that we see here that have been made by everyone else, we could be making the same. So what we have to remember when we look at that and think about that is that products, actual physical products, not apps, physical things, they are the containers of all industries. If a country can't make something, if a population, if a city, if all the people in that city can't actually make things, what happens is you've got nothing more to measure, you've got nothing to finance, you've got nothing to sell, you've got nothing, you end up with a donut city, there's nothing in the middle, right? So America found this in cities like Detroit after their automotive closures and steel manufacturing started to go elsewhere, and Detroit just became a shithole. No one wanted to live there. There was no jobs. Anyone who was smart left Detroit. And what Targel was describing and the whole IMAP investigation was about that exact thing. How can we not become the next Detroit? We don't want to become a donut city. We want to retain all of our smart people so that they don't become coffee roasters or they don't go offshore and we don't feed the brain drain. We actually maintain all of our smart people and build a productive economy and a productive society. Because if we don't do that, any one of you guys who comes up and wants to emerge into the industry, if there's no fabric around you, there's no industry connections and established collaborative networks around you, you can't get your job done. You can't make your innovative pathway or your product, right? We need a systemic, networked, industry as well as society. It doesn't matter what level it is. Government needs to talk with industry needs to talk with the startups need to be able to access capital. All of these materials here, again, people overseas are developing these brand new materials that are going to inform brand new products of the future. And again, there's absolutely no reason why people like you guys in this room shouldn't have access to them and not just CSIRO, and why you can't have access to them. Really, it's just a matter of how we start to rethink the way we make stuff, why we make stuff, why it's important to us, and not just, rest on our laurels. Oh, we're too far away from everything else, so stuff it. We really actually have to embrace the opportunities that we have, that technology is starting to provide us. The other great thing that's going to actually completely and utterly change the power play of who makes what and why is this whole energy parity scenario that's pretty much from this year onwards going to change a whole power play, an entire product development paradigm. Everything that's been made or done and the reasons why things have been made or done up until this point has all been underpinned by the energy that it takes to provide that or make that. So oil, right? That's just the raw energy, right? We've got to pay for that energy, costs a certain amount of money, etc. So it has profound roll-on effects. And when you look at Australia, those effects actually get a little bit more complicated because we still have an economic caveman mentality. We still dig shit out of the ground and sell it to the rest of the world. We don't actually make stuff out of that shit that we dig out of the ground, right? Germany, for instance, it's a landlocked country pretty much. It can't dig stuff out of the ground because everyone owns every single piece of land. They literally cannot dig anything out of the ground. They've got to buy all of their energy. They can't just, rely on that, so they have to rely on their brain, their smarts. America started to adopt that. Silicon Valley rose up 30 years ago. They used to just dig shit out of the ground, pump oil around the world, but they started to adopt a more innovative investment culture. We have to do the same. These graphs are basically going to propel us in that direction, because as soon as sustainable energy takes over, and oil lobbyists and fossil fuel lobbyists won't have the kind of same power hold on governments that they have up until now, everything will change, right? So one of the things that will happen as we start to move forward, from 2018 onwards in this new renewable energy paradigm is, we'll start to be able to buy jackets that have solar gathering thread in them. You won't have to plug your phone in anymore. There's so many profound changes that are going to come our way that, we could probably spend an entire day talking about all of them. Here's just a little selection of them. I won't talk about them all. Take a photo of it or just Google it. Pretty much every single industry sector is going to be utterly transformed by either new materials, sustainable energy, or the little guy emerging and taking out a Goliath industry. And it's happening all over the place. We all know the stories, right? So profound time of change, profound time of disruption. So when we look at Australia, and when we look at how makerspaces can help propel this, what we're actually looking at is something really quite significant. We have all of the business, creative resources that we need. We have it. We have 2,000, just in Melbourne alone, we have 2,000 graduates, design and engineering graduates coming out of universities every single year. But we certainly do not have 2,000 entrepreneurs in product development being supported every year. But most of those graduates, they have the business and marketing skills, they have the design skills, they know how to identify a gap in the market and commercialize it. But the one thing that they don't have, or a couple of things, is they don't have access to advanced manufacturing, for example, because it's way too expensive for them. They also don't have, access to lots of factory floor space, because again, it's way too expensive for them. So the very physical, practical resources that they require to build a proper prototype so that they can get the investment and commercialize, they can't get access to that. So that's the number one fundamental barrier. And a makerspace essentially provides a bridge over that barrier, or provides a rabbit hole through the fence around that barrier. So, a properly set up makerspace will provide all of those very, very expensive resources at a very, very low daily or weekly rate or monthly rate. It'll also provide all of the networking and skills training that anyone might need to fill their skills gaps. The reason why I sort of pulled Australia a little bit further away from the rest of the world there is not just to make room for the footprints, but it's to accentuate this whole idea that we do feel very, very isolated from the rest of the world, and I really believe that that's actually just a mindset. I think that we can solve these things by starting to look at the maker movement as not just a gathering of creatives that make kooky little pieces of artwork. I'm an artist, so I'm allowed to say that. I actually studied painting at BCA. I always felt the disdain of people who made lots of money, and I'd walk around with ripped jeans. But those creative people and all of those creative spaces around Melbourne actually provide the foundation for a thriving, innovative culture, and it's what makes Melbourne so great. Without that, we have a dead, boring city. So we can't discount that. All of that creativity, all of that crafting is essential. At Space Tank, half of our people are traditional craftspeople, and the other half are like industrial designers and dealing in plastics and metals and 3D printers and so on. What generally starts to happen is that the more tech-orientated people go to the craftspeople for real inspiration, and the craftspeople go to the tech people just for boring skills, right? It's interesting. And both of them think the other's boring, or the other's, they're phobic about the things that they don't have, and they start to realize when they're working closely together that there's a lot to be shared and a lot to be gained by working together. When it comes to advanced manufacturing, what we again see is the top end of town have all of the access to all of the expensive equipment, and again it's the low people, all of those people in the other category who can't get access. But in fact, if we give them access to it, then in terms of the growth potential, we're actually getting a lot more growth from an economy point of view, but also from an individual startup or business point of view. And I really like this one, because if you're in a big company, or you look at a big company that's making innovative sort of products, they might be developing one innovative product a year, and there might be 500 people in that company. So one innovation per 500 people. But let's say Jennifer over here, there might be 500 Jennifers who all have amazing ideas. So if each one of these Jennifers got $50,000, which is about the same amount of money as the big company probably gets from the government in subsidies, then what we'll actually see is, let's say there's a 30% hit rate out of all of those people, we're going to see hundreds of innovations coming out. So from an economic point of view, it makes sense to support the little people and not the big people, because the big people will take care of themselves. So again, a makerspace does that. It supports the little people. It essentially gives this person this type of community, and that's really, really empowering. And what it does is it breaks down barriers. So again, at the top end of town love keeping up the walls because they want to block the competition from below, and what makerspace do is they break those walls down. So we start to open up the floodgates and start to essentially promote this type of activity where everyone's working together at every level. I see the evidence of this at Space Tank, where we have patent attorneys, very, very clever patent attorneys, talking with emerging people who have a sketch on a napkin. The patent attorneys are $400 an hour, and the person who's doing the sketch on the napkin is breastfeeding, right? So that's amazing. The patent attorney sees tomorrow's invoice, because that person has just spotted a gap in the maternity market that no one else would know if they're, unless they're breastfeeding. So bringing the top end of town into a group of makers is actually really empowering for both parties. And that's just one example. I've got so many examples. I'll probably just rush through the rest of this because this is all fairly familiar territory. We want to essentially not ignore the fact that we're living on a planet. We want to act on global trends. We want to recognise that these global trends are what, on a macro level, affecting our economies, that then on a micro level affect us. So if we can start to look at these things when we're developing our products, we're going to be positioning ourselves, in a competitive way for the future, rather than looking backwards. So then we have to look at our local strengths, and again, we have to do what Tech Shop didn't do. We have to link in with all of the local strengths around us, which means work together. On a makerspace, makerspaces survive because we work with equipment suppliers, we work with government, we work with the grassroots. But as an individual, you have to do the same. You have to form a community around yourself that will support you and help you grow. And collaboration is about, you don't just suck from that community, and you don't just tell the person you're collaborating with, well, I'm going to give you this value, because it might not be the value that potential collaborator for you is actually looking for. So when you want to collaborate with someone, you don't just say, I want this, you give me this, and I'll give you that in return, because that just doesn't work like that. You say, I want this is what I want. What do you want? What do you need? And you try and fill that need for them. That's proper collaboration. And what we generally tend to see is, I want, and I'll give you what I want, rather than I want, and now what do you want? And I'll try and give you what you want. And that's real collaboration. I don't know do I have enough time to just jump into a couple little examples? Yeah. So I've got 3 examples here. Baskin Cycles, they started at Space Tank about 2 years ago. They were thrown out from Toyota chassis R&D department when Toyota went offshore. And Benjamin Schultz here really loved bicycles, so what he did is he sold his fast cars and got a couple of the people who were in the chassis department with him, and they started coming up with an idea to produce pretty much in my opinion, the world's sexiest high-performance bicycle. It's a carbon fibre 3D printed titanium bike. Now these guys, they had all of the engineering capabilities to hit every single engineering milestone in a cost-effective way, and they did that. Within 8 months, they'd done all their prototyping at Space Tank, and then they moved to Kensington, and now they're in a factory in Fairfield. This year, they're about to crack their first $1 million turnover, and pretty much I think 70% of their global sales, or 70% of all of their sales is export. 30% of all of their sales is domestic sales. And they sell their bikes for between $13,000 and $18,000. One of the reasons why I brought these guys up as an example is not because their bikes are so sexy and because they're about to turn over $1 million, but because for all of their engineering smarts, they weren't very good at sales and marketing. And, you know, that might sound odd because they're about to crack $1 million, but you know, they did recognise that their weakness was sales and marketing. So they started talking to our resident knife maker, who's brilliant at marketing, and they started learning a lot from him. And they also didn't know how to get their carbon fibre weave to stick properly as they were making their new sort of carbon tubes with resin. So they spoke to another Space Tank resident who comes from a juggling background. He's a street performer, and he knows all about resin because he makes custom beer tap handles. And this is a real creative, you know, this is the kind of other category. So they were learning a hell of a lot by being, you know, just across the corridor from other people. Danny Storm I find very intriguing because she's sort of a classic example of someone who just keeps kicking against the pricks. She has the ability to, or I guess the resilience and courage to hold on to her passion and her ideals, even though a potential client or commercial prospect is not necessarily yet within her view or on the horizon. That's a very, very risky commercial proposition. Usually you do it the other way around. You locate a commercial proposition, identify it, and then build your product to suit that gap. She did it the other way around, and everyone said, you're crazy, you won't sell those tables, you know, they're too odd, they cost too much money, no one will want them. And we kept supporting her, and we, you know, she linked into the Space Tank community, learned all the skills that she needed, and started to make these prototypes. And we started to encourage her, all sorts of different people at the tank, saying, you know, don't give up, try and find the low-hanging fruit of possibilities, so that the easy things to achieve. And, you know, perhaps consider that your clients are not necessarily consumers, because consumers may not want to pay $8,000 for one of your tables. So consequently now, long story short, she's now working with international property developers. And so she's more of a business-to-business model. And that's, again, a very exciting prospect. And you know, being able to work with international interior designers and so on means that she now can tap into all of their clients. So there's many different ways to kill a cat. And here's some of the, you know, different things that she's done with different people at Space Tank to develop her products and the way she's worked together with people. The last example, I'll just quickly round off with this one, is a failure. And the reason why I bring this one up is because it's very, very important to embrace failure and learn from it and know why things fail, so that we don't do it again. So this gentleman here is your classic uber geek, incredibly intelligent, bit of a genius. He developed an instantaneous human-scale 3D scanner with, I think, 74 Raspberry Pi cameras all hooked together onto a big server. And someone's laughing. And he started a company called Mini-Me. and the Mini-Me machine. And he was scanning people and building this scanner, and he had 2 angel investors. One of them was a co-founder of Telechoice, those yellow booths that you see in Northland, Southland, etc., where you can get SIM cards and cheap phones. Now these investors, they weren't giving this guy any advice at all, and unfortunately, he started consulting to Officeworks. And guess what happened? Officeworks stole his idea, and now Officeworks have the Mini-Me machine. They even stole the name. So, it's also important to be very protective of your IP, but you do have to share it. And when you do share it, you have to be very careful about how you share it. So that was a sad story. However, he is really quite a genius, and now he's formed a Bitcoin company. So I don't think he won't go under. He'll just keep on getting up and moving forward. And again, I think that like when we look at those 3 stories, we see what a makerspace can essentially do. I've got hundreds of these kinds of stories. Currently, we have a medtech prosthetics developer. We've got someone building an electric vehicle. We've got a whole heap of sustainable building products going on, amongst all of the niche products that are happening at Space Tank as well. And all of those different people are all working together, and they're starting to attract to the top end of town. So I'm getting a lot of groups of business people, state government people, equipment suppliers, etc., etc. And they're all coming because they smell opportunity. And the trick is to embrace all of that, provide a platform for it, so that all of these different industries and groups of people can come together and work together, but you have to get out of the way as an organisation. So you provide the platform, you provide all the facility, you get out of the way, don't impose rules, don't impose criteria and so on, and you let them organically work together. And what happens out of that is you have this systemic network that starts to come out of a space like a makerspace. And that, I think, is the absolute essential key to what a makerspace does for a city, but also what it does for an individual. Thank you.
I'm going to throw the floor open and see if anyone has any questions for Holger. Yes.
Holger, how do you handle IP in a collaborative space like that?
How do I handle what, sorry?
IP, so sharing, like people collaborating and then actually protecting the IP of each individual.
If someone has sensitive IP, they keep their doors closed. It's as simple as that. Again, it's get out of the way. If we were as high operating as New Lab New York, then we would have scanners at the door, and people would sign in, but we're not there yet. But I also think that, for a lot of these types of scary questions, I think you can look at it or attack it with a healthy dose of humanism, just respect, basically. And if you build that culture of respect and trust, then people will talk about their ideas and share, and it won't go beyond the walls. So people have a general, a natural understanding of respect and trust, and where you have to, not share certain things, and that culture it's very, very important to maintain that. And if I had a padlock on every door and had Big Brother sort of methodologies in play, then it wouldn't be a free environment for people to share their skills, because they would be worried about, well, this person's going to steal my technique. So what we tend to see at the Tank is that people just don't worry about that. And if they do have something, they just hide it themselves. It happens organically. So at the moment, it's not an issue.
Okay. Thank you so much, Holger. That was awesome.